Canto 2, Chapter 7, Text 9. Yad venam utpatagatam dvijavakya vajra Nishpushta porushabhagam niraye patantam Tratvatito jagati putra param chalebhe Dugdha vasuni vasudha sakalani yena Vasudha sakalani yena. Word for word. Yat, when? Venam, unto King Vena. Utpatagatam, going astray from the righteous path. Dvija, of the Brahmanas. Vakya, words of cursing. Vajra, thunderbolt. Nishpushta, being burnt by. Purusha, great deeds. Bhagam, opulence. Nidaye, unto hell. Patantam, going down. Tratva, by delivering. Artita, so being prayed for. Jagati, on the world. Putra padam, the position of the sun. Cha, as well as. Lebe, achieved. Dugdha, exploited. Vasuni, produce. Vasudha, the earth. Sakalani, all kinds of. Yena, by whom. Translation. Maharaj Vena went astray from the path of righteousness, and the Brahmanas chastised him by the thunderbolt curse. By this King Vena was burnt with his good deeds and opulence, and was en route to hell. The Lord, by his causeless mercy, descended as his son by the name of Prithu, delivered the condemned King Vena from hell, and exploited the earth by drawing all kinds of crops as produce. Purport. According to the system of Varnashrama Dharma, the pious and learned Brahmanas were the natural guardians of society. The Brahmanas, by their learned labour of love, would instruct the administrator kings how to rule the country in complete righteousness, and thus the process would go on as a perfect welfare state. The kings or the Kshatriya administrators would always consult the council of learned Brahmanas. They were never autocratic monarchs. The scriptures, like Manu Samhita and other authorized books of the great sages, were guiding principles for ruling the subjects, and there was no need for less intelligent persons to manufacture a code of law in the name of a democracy. The less intelligent mass of people have very little knowledge of their own welfare, as a child has very little knowledge of its future well-being. The experienced father guides the innocent child towards the path of progress, and the childlike mass of people need similar guidance. The standard welfare codes are already there in the Manu Samhita and other Vedic literatures. The learned Brahmanas would advise the king in terms of those standard books of knowledge, and with reference to the particular situation of time and place. Such Brahmanas were not paid servants of the king, and therefore they had the strength to dictate to the king on the principles of scriptures. This system continued even up to the time of Maharaj Chandragupta, and the Brahmana Chanakya was his unpaid prime minister. Maharaj Vena did not adhere to this principle of ruling, and he disobeyed the learned Brahmanas. The broad-minded Brahmanas were not self-interested, but looked to the interest of complete welfare for all the subjects. They wanted to chastise King Vena for his misconduct and so prayed to the Almighty Lord as well as cursed the king. Long life, obedience, good reputation, righteousness, prospects of being promoted to higher planets, and blessings of great personalities are all vanquished simply by disobedience to a great soul. One should strictly try to follow in the footsteps of great souls. Maharaj Vena became a king undoubtedly due to his past deeds of righteousness, but because he willfully neglected the great souls, he was punished by the loss of all the above-mentioned acquisitions. In the Vamana Purana, the history of Maharaj Vena and his degradation are fully described. When Maharaj Prithu heard about the hellish condition of his father, Vena, who was suffering from leprosy in the family of a Mlecha, he at once brought the former king to Kurukshetra for his purification and relieved him of all sufferings. Maharaj Prithu, the incarnation of God, descended by the prayer of the Brahmanas to rectify the disorders on earth. He produced all kinds of crops, but at the same time he performed the duty of a son who delivers his father from hellish conditions. The word putra means one who delivers from hell, called put. That is a worthy son. So, Maharaj Vena went astray from the path of righteousness, and the Brahmanas chastised him by the thunderbolt curse. By this, King Vena was burnt with his good deeds and opulence, and was en route to hell. The Lord, by his causeless mercy, descended as his son by the name of Prithu, delivered the condemned King Vena from hell, and exploited the earth by drawing all kinds of crops as produce. So, a lot of points made here in the verse and the purport by Srila Prabhupada. This incarnation is Maharaj Prithu, and this is more elaborately described in the 4th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. The whole story is told there very nicely over a few chapters. Interestingly enough, that is mentioned here by Srila Prabhupada to the making reference to the Vamana Purana. There's more information. I have all the Puranas, and I looked that up. And I looked up the Vamana Purana. It's a nice explanation, especially, but Prabhupada references it in regard to what happened to Maharaj Vena after he was killed by the Brahmanas. And it's a very nice story told there. It's mentioned here that he came back in the next life and was born in the there in the Vamana Purana it's mentioned he was born in the upcountry, and he appeared in the family of Mlechas, very low class people. He suffered from leprosy, also mentioned there in the Vamana Purana. He suffered from tuberculosis as well. So he really had some debilitating diseases. So he had leprosy and tuberculosis, and he was a real kind of ugly and real kind of low class person. That was his next life. Now here is mentioned that King Prithu descended by the prayer of the Brahmanas to rectify the disorders on earth. He produced all kinds of crops, and he also saved his father. So we'll get to these other points, but just in regard to that story, it's a very interesting story. Maharaj Vena, in his next life, he came back, and then what happened was that Narad Muni happened to come up to the court of King Prithu. King Prithu and his wife Archie. And King Prithu, although kind of all-knowing himself, he's not exactly Vishnu Tattva, he's Shaktivesh, he's Jiva Tattva. Archie is a representation of the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi Devi, but they are Jivas. They're mentioned very clearly in the 4th canto. They're not Vishnu Tattva, they're Jivas, but they're Shaktivesh avatar. They're very empowered. But I'll come back to that. But anyway, Narad Muni came to the court, and Prithu asked about his father Vena and what happened to him. And it was Narad Muni who told him that he was born again in the family of the Mlechas and living in the upcountry. So King Prithu wanted to go there, and it's mentioned here in today's purport that he saved his father from hell, and he did that. He went there And he was staying. Now here it is mentioned he went to Kurukshetra. There's different areas of Kurukshetra when you go there. I've been a few times. There's one Brahma Sarovar. There's also another type of Sarovar. There's different lingas there. There's a Shiva linga there. There's a very famous Stanu Tirtha. All these different places. So Narad Muni said that we have to go there. And so actually Prithu went there, and with the permission of Vena, who's in the form who became as the son of the Mlechas, he took the permission of the parents and took him. And he was kind of grown up already, but he took him, and Narad Muni said, you have to take him there to Kurukshetra, and he has to go and bathe in that Sarovar to be freed from the sinful reactions. This is how he can be freed from that condition, freed from the hellish condition. So when they went there to bathe, that Lord Vayu came there and prohibited it. It's an amazing story. He prohibited it. He said, no, he's too sinful to bathe in this Sarovar. He'll contaminate the whole area. He said, you have to take him to all the holy places first, and visit all the holy places, and let him be purified, and then when he's purified from visiting all the holy places, bring him back here, then he can take a dip in this one. So they did. King Prithu took his father in the next life, and he took him to all the holy places, and they arrived back, and he went for a dip, and then he came out, he was purified, he prayed to Lord Shiva in the Stanu Tirtha, and Lord Shiva was very pleased with him. There's more to this, that he was very pleased. He appeared and wanted to bless him, and he asked for some, whatever you want, I will give you. He had an associate who'd taken birth as a dog, so he wanted he wanted him to be freed from that condition. So that Lord Shiva granted that, and then Lord Shiva said, "I am very pleased by your purification and your tapasya, and in your next life you'll be born in heaven. You'll be born in heaven, and you'll be born as my son." And indeed, he came back as King Andaka. Now, it's a very interesting story in regard how he was born. He was born from one time Lord Shiva and Parvati were in the forest, and playfully she put her hands on the eyes of Lord Shiva, and she was trying to hold him, and it was very hot. She started sweating, and Lord Shiva was sweating, and the sweat mixed together and fell on the ground, and this demon came, and came up, and he was Andaka. Andaka. So he was born blind, because Lord Shiva at the time had his eyes covered. He was born blind. Later on, he did a lot of tapasya to please Lord Brahma, to please Lord Brahma, and he got those benedictions that he couldn't be killed by anyone, even Lord Vishnu, and Vishnu couldn't harm him. And so Lord Brahma said, well, this is very difficult to award. But and he also asked for his sight back. So he got his sight back at that time, and it was actually by Lord Shiva's arrangement, he was killed by. He killed him. Lord Shiva killed him and liberated him with his stride. There's a whole other story in regard to that, but I won't go into all. There's all these correlative stories that go off to the side type of thing. But anyway, so that's the story of Vena. That how he. He had to be killed by the Brahmanas, and then he came back in the Mlecha family, and then was suffering like anything. He was like in the hell, and he had to be punished first and for his sins. Now, interesting story there how Maharaj Vena, in regard to it, his story is told in the 4th canto, how the family and Prithu came and everything like that, and there was Anga. King Anga was Maharaj Vena's father, and he married Sunita. Now here also mentioned that she was the daughter of death personified. Mentioned here, right? Death personified. So I was looking into that, and sometimes Yamaraj is referred to as death personified. There are different devas who sometimes referred to as death. Lord Shiva is sometimes referred to death personified because he brings around about destruction. So Lord Shiva is sometimes referred to that, and Lord Yamaraj. There's a goddess also called Mrityu Devi. She's referred to, and there's a demigod also called Mrityu, who's also referred to as the god of death. Yama brings about the justice and everything, like what someone's supposed to get. This Mrityu brings about what the causes of what brings you to the death. And as it's mentioned that he's in charge of, like, there's main categories, 101 different main categories that bring you to death. This is another story that's told in the Vamana Purana, and that 101 different ways, main ways. There's millions of ways, but there's main ways, and Mrityu has got some hand in that. So he's a demigod, and he's also referred to as death personified, and so he is not considered very auspicious. And generally, everyone steers clear of him. And he was married to Niriti, and she was the personification of misery. So you have Mrityu, Niriti, and Sunita was the daughter. Somehow or other, Anga got married to her. And because she was all right, but she was a little bit affected. But there was another whole story there, how he married Sunita. And so they didn't have children, and so Maharaj Anga asked all of the Brahmanas and the sages why he couldn't have a son, because he wanted the lineage to continue. And the sages deliberated and told him that due to some sinful activities in your past life, they didn't elaborate what those sinful activities were, but he said due to some sinful activities in your past life, you couldn't have children, you couldn't have a son, especially in this life. And so it is commented, it is actually mentioned, the sages comment and say generally when one can't have children like that or can't have a son, it is due to some sinful activities. And so they organised a yagya to propitiate Lord Vishnu. From the yagya, a glowing personality appeared, gave a pudding, he gave to his wife, and they were able to have Maharaj Venu as their son. But right from the very beginning, he was very kind of a wicked person. Right from the very beginning, even when he was a child, he was a very wicked person. And it's also mentioned in the fourth canon, also in the Vamana Purana, that he was very influenced by his grandfather. Very influenced by his grandfather, who was Mrityu. And so and also the grandmother was their misery. So he was also, and Sunita to some extent, but very much mentioned is Mrityu, the grandfather. And so he was very cruel. Maharaj Venu was very, very cruel, even as a young boy. He would go out hunting, and this is mentioned in the fourth canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and he would mercilessly just kill animals left, right and centre, just mercilessly kill them. And his father was just, of course the Kshatriyas, it is said, would go out and hunt, but just a few lesser animals just to practice their skills. But it was very, very selective. But he would just go indiscriminately and butcher them. And he enjoyed it. And so his father tried to rectify him and punish him. He punished him in different ways. But later on, when he was playing with his friends, his boyfriends, he would get really rough with them and bash them up. And there were some incidents of actually killing some of the boys. This is like so. His father just punished. His father was sick with worry. Father was sick with worry about his son, and so he punished him in so many different ways, trying to correct him. He like locked him up and all this type of thing, but he wouldn't change. He only got worse. And this is Vena, and he only got worse. And so King Anga got so disturbed as he was growing up. Vana got worse and worse and worse. He didn't know what to do. And he was so disturbed in the middle of the night while he was sleeping with his wife at the side. He just got up in the middle of the night. He just left home, and that was it. He never came back. He was just so disgusted and so traumatized by his own son that he just got up in the middle of the night and left. And that was it. And everyone went looking for him. What's going on? And they couldn't find him. He said that later on, by the yogic power, he burnt to ashes his own body. So the sages said, well, this is not proper that there is no king. And so they said, well, the son has to be the king. So they went to the mother, Sunita, asked for permission to install, because as Prabhupada mentions here, the Brahmanas are the natural custodians and guardians of society. So they're always thinking about the welfare of the state. And so I think, well, it's not good that there's no king, because, and indeed there's, there's all sorts of crimes come up and all sorts of things don't happen that should happen. So they went to the Sunita and she said yes, and so they prepared. Although the ministers of King Anga's ministers were dead opposed it. This is mentioned. They were against him being put on the throne as the king, because everyone knew him. Everyone knew him. So he will be a really bad king. But the sages deliberated, said, well, have to have some king. So they thought that, maybe some things were exaggerated. They didn't know. They were in the forest. And so anyway, he was installed as king. But when he got to be the king, it only increased his viciousness. Once he got the position, it just went to his head like anything. And so much so that he just, forbade people from going to the yagyas, doing yagyas. He thought actually by performing yagyas, the people will get powerful, and then, I might be challenged. He thought all these different things. And so this was going on. So this is, Vana became more and more and more and more like that, and more atrocities and cruelty, and just slaughtering here, killing people who he thought were against him, and all this type of thing was going on. And so everyone was crying, everyone was afraid, but he was so strong and powerful that no one could stand up to him. So then the sages deliberated again, and this is very bad. The situation in the kingdom is atrocious. We have to do something. So they all together went to see the king. Well, they were very disturbed, but they spoke to him very nicely. There's a nice section in the fourth canto. This is, you can read that section there. And the king should be like this, you should be like that, you shouldn't be acting in this way. But he was all haughty and contemptuous. And he derided them, he insulted them. And this is what Prabhupada refers to here. He insulted the great sages, the great brahmanas. So here Prabhupada emphasizes very much that the kings need to consult the council of elevated brahmanas. It's not that the kings were, and Prabhupada mentions it, they were not autocrats. They just decided themselves. Of course they had their ministers and so many other consultants. And I always remember the instruction when Yudhisthira went to Bhishmadev. One of his Bhishmadev's instructions to Maharaj Yudhisthira was that, especially in important matters, do not arrive at decisions just by yourself. Always consult and take the good counsel of so many others. So Bhishmadev instructed Yudhisthira like that. And so the kings were supposed to be like that. They were not dictators, even autocrats. They were supposed to consult, but especially they should consult the brahmanas and give all respect to the brahmanas. So this is very much emphasized by Srila Prabhupada here, that the brahmanas had to be consulted. But not only weren't they consulted, he was just doing as he pleased. even whatever he didn't even care what his ministers said. He was just solely deciding everything. And so when the sages came, he was very contemptuous. He derided them. You praise the demigods and you praise Vishnu, but you don't know that the king is actually the living representative of all these personalities. Words to this effect. The king is the representative of all these personalities. So here I am, and you are saying that all these yagyas worshipping the Devas, you should worship me. It was like Hiranyakashipu did like that. He stopped all the yagyas and he said, you want to worship someone? And he banned the worship of Vishnu and the worship of the Devas. And you want to worship someone? You worship me. So King Vena said the same thing. You should worship me. So the sages, they were very upset by the reaction of King Vena and decided he was not fit to rule the kingdom. So by mantra, they said that he should be killed. Actually, he should be killed. He's killing, and there's no stopping him. It's getting worse. They considered all these things, and by mantra they killed him. They removed him. This is a very extreme measure. You don't read about this so much in all the Shastras. You very rarely read that the Brahmanas resorted to doing something like that. So we can understand it's a very extreme situation that they decided. They decided amongst themselves. So the Brahmanas would be consulted, but they themselves wouldn't act independently. And Prabhupada mentions here they would also consult the Shastras, the Manusamhita, other Vedic Shastras, on how things would go in a very prosperous way, both materially and spiritually. And then Prabhupada makes a point here in the purport that people need to be guided. This notion of so-called democracy, where people are elected by people who really, ultimately the mass of people don't really know what is actually beneficial, especially spiritually, for themselves. Prabhupada makes a point here, I noted also, that he makes a point that the Brahmanas were not paid employees of the king. They were not paid. They were maintained. They were given dakshina. This is very, very important, because if you're paid, then you're in a compromised position. You'll think that if I say something too against what the king wants or what the government wants, then that they'll cut off my livelihood. So therefore, I better be careful what I say or what I do. So therefore, Prabhupada emphasises this in a couple of different places in the purport, that the Brahmanas, the council of Brahmanas, the Brahmanas would come, they were not paid. And he says this. So this should be the system. So education in general should be given freely. You shouldn't have to pay. And in Vedic times, education would be given freely. Brahmanas would give it freely. They didn't charge for giving this knowledge. They didn't charge for doing the yagyas. Of course, the etiquette is you give some dakshina, but just according to your capacity. And I know in Bali there's a big problem with this. The Brahmanas, they actually charge fixed. You want this yagya, this amount. You want that, and it's become so expensive that the poor people can't afford to do the yagya, even the death ceremony. Some devotees were telling me that the poor people of their village, they had to wait. Their mother or father or grandfather died. They wanted to do the yagya, and they couldn't afford it. They had to preserve the body and wait till someone else died or a few others died, and then between all of them get together and pay for the yagya. So this is going on. But the Brahmanas held their ground. No, this is the fee and this is what you have to pay. This is not good. This is corruption. And so these yagyas, this information is not charged. Dakshina is given according to your capacity. It can be even flowers or fruits, whatever, but not fixed fee. You want to do some yagya, $10,000. So I remember in Sydney years ago when I was the temple president, one young couple came and they'd been to some of the Hindu temples and they said they wanted to do I was a housewarming yajna, and they got a new house out in the western suburbs, and they'd been to a few of the Hindu temples. We wanted them to come out and do the ceremony in the new house. And so, but they charged so much money, we couldn't afford it. He said, "Can you do something like that?" Yeah, we can do it. We'll do it for free. We'll come there. Oh, they were so happy. Yeah, well, and you'll do the ceremony. Yeah, we'll bring them. We've got the puja. They know how to do the ceremony. We'll do also the kirtan, prashadam. All the things will be there. Don't worry. Don't worry. We're taking care of all these things. So anyway, this point is very much emphasized by Srila Prabhupada here. They shouldn't be in the employ. And in this way they're free. If they have to say something very heavy or something like that, they're not afraid to do it. They're not afraid that they're going to lose what's going to happen to their family and so on and so forth. So this is a very, very important point. So anyway, so they killed Vena, but after some time, because there was no king, it is mentioned that the crime went up, thieves, it became rampant everywhere. So they consulted amongst themselves and they decided, well, they knew that Sunita had preserved King Vena's body. She preserved the body. And so they went there and got the body, and by their mystic power and their powers in general, they are able to, by mantra and by churning the body, this is described here. Now in the Vamana Purana it's said a little bit differently, that they churned the left arm and they churned the right arm. Here it's mentioned that first of all they churned the thighs. They churned the thighs, and from the thighs a sinful person was manifest. Bahulaka was, I think his name was mentioned there. And he took on all the sins of Vena, although there was some left over, obviously, because he had to take birth as a Malecha. But and he went away. He was designated to a certain area. And then they churned the arms. And then they churned the arms, and then a great personality came. That personality was King Prithu, and then they churned again, and another great personality came. She was Queen Achi, his wife. So as I said earlier, that King Prithu, now interestingly enough, when he appeared, he was such an effulgent personality that all the Devas, Lord Brahma came, and all the Devas came, they all came to greet and pay respects to this incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Shatya Vaishavata, he was not Vishnu Tattva, but nevertheless, he was very empowered. And Lord Brahma, Prithu was there like that. He could see there were certain lines on his hands, and he saw the soles of his feet. There was lotuses. He saw there were there's some markings, not the full markings of a Vishnu incarnation, but some markings of a Vishnu incarnation on his palms and on the soles of his feet. So therefore he understood that this was a partial manifestation or expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So there was on one side Prithu, on the other side Achi. Very, very amazing personalities. And so everyone came, paid their respect, many praises were given, so on, and ceremony was performed. He was installed as the king and she as the queen. At one point I noted when I was reading through that section that Prithu spoke and said all these praises, I'm not very comfortable receiving all these praises. You're praising things that I haven't even done yet, and I haven't manifest yet. So, and then he actually said one should not accept praises for things that actually he doesn't possess. That was a very interesting point, and Prabhupada actually commented on that. Anyway, so the story of Prithu, there's an incarnation that appeared, scheduled incarnation. He appeared, and then of course he was ruling the kingdom very nicely, but he found that previously the earth had decided King Vena was so atrocious and the whole situation was so bad, she decided not to produce the things that were necessary for fruits and vegetables and grains, and she just withheld all that. So Prithu noted all this and he sought out the earth, and he was a bit angry that she was doing that, and he pursued her. She took the form of a cow and he pursued her, and then in the end he pacified her, and she said, all right, I'll produce again. He assured her that everything was changed now. The people are different, the situation's different. He assured Mother Earth in the form of a cow that everything was all right. So then she told him to flatten out the hilly areas, make it all flat. This is nicely described in the 4th canto. So he did like that, and then there were nice big pastures, flat ground pastures, and so he was the true monarch, and he saw the yagyas were performed. He saw to everything that everyone earned their livelihood very nicely. So Prabhupada says here, actually, a true monarch is much better than the so-called democracy that's these days. How does he put it here? He says that the kings would always consult the council of learned brahmanas. They in turn would consult the authorized books, and there was no need for less intelligent persons to manufacture a code of law in the name of democracy. So there's no need to manufacture everything. Everything was already there to follow. This has been going down. And Prabhupada mentions here Maharaj Chandragupta. I think Maharaj Chandragupta lived 2,000 to 2,500 years ago. A very famous Prime Minister, Brahmana Pandit Chanakya. He said right up until that time this system was followed. He was a very powerful king. Chandragupta, he was a very, very powerful king, and he had a very wonderful prime minister who was a brahmana who was guiding him. So system was good. When it became corrupt, that's another thing, but now you have a system where it's a kind of manufactured trial and error type of system, and he said it's less than ideal, very imperfect. So this doesn't bring about a real welfare state, a real spiritual state, where material and spiritual are going very nicely, but kings like Prithu is considered, the empowerment of the Lord for ruling as a king, and he was considered one of the first kings to introduce a nice system, especially following Varna and Ashrama, and so Prabhupada mentions Varna and Ashrama also. Hare Krishna, thank you very much for listening. Now, just finally, one last point. Ayusriyam yaso dharmam lokana sesya evacha hanti siyam sisavani pumsamaharatikkrama. When someone persecutes great souls, all his benedictions of longevity, beauty, fame, religion, blessings, promotion to higher planets will be destroyed. So one has to be very, very careful how they interact with great personalities, if they're disrespectful, because whatever you had, and this is mentioned here by Prabhupada in regard to Vena. Vena, certainly to be the king, he must have done some pious activity, even though he was very cruel, but even to get in the position of a king. But he acted cruel, that diminished his piety, and then on top of it, he disrespected the Brahmanas, the great elevated souls. So then Prabhupada actually mentions another aspect, that he stopped the yagyas, so that all these things, he was cruel, that was diminishing him. He stopped the yagyas, that was an offence to the Lord Vishnu and to the demigod, that was diminishing him. And then on top of it, the last thing was he disrespected all the Brahmanas, and that's it. His longevity, his beauty, his fame, religion, blessings, promotion to higher planets, certainly didn't get any of those things. And we see what happened to him in the next life. So we've got time for maybe one question or two questions, if anyone wants to ask.
It mentions in the purport that Raj Venu was en route to hell. But
A what?
It mentions in the purport that Maharaj Venu was en route to hell, but it doesn't particularly say he went to the hellish realm. It just seems like he took birth in the family. He took birth. It was like a hellish situation. I'm just wondering, is that what you're referring to? En route to hell? like taking birth in hellish
Um, I think, well, in regard to this purport, the route to hell, yeah, but I mean, he would have had to, as all souls, you know, who are very sinful, they do have to answer to Yamaraj. So there would have been a period in between where he went to one of those puts, those hellish planets, and have to suffer. It's not specifically mentioned, and I think you're correct in regard to the reference here, because the story is told about how he came into the Mleccha family in his next life. So I think that the reference to the hell was referring to that. But certainly he would have had to suffer and be punished by Yamaraj as well.
Because all the religious traditions, they all talk about if you're sinful, you're going to hell, and you sort of think that, well, in this age, Kali Yuga, everyone is destined to go there, but whether it's more just putting fear of God into people to toe the line, or...
Well, there is a hell.
Because I'm just thinking the timeline, like if he did spend time in the hellish realm and then took birth in an Mleccha family, you know, there must have been a long time duration sort of altogether, like talk about thousands of years in the hellish realm or whatever it might have been.
Well, not necessarily. It depends on the individual how long they spend it. But Prithu was the king, and he was asking Narad about what happened to his father. So you know, I guess you can try to understand it that way, in a linear way, like how long was he in hell, and then how long was it before he came back into the Mleccha body. It doesn't explain those things. Even the Vamana Purana, I didn't read exactly that. Maybe it's some other shastras mention it, but the Vamana Purana was only told the story of how he came back. But certainly he would have had to get some sort of punishment. All right. Yes, one last question.
Like you mentioned last, like Brahmana churning the arms and thighs, and then Krishna came.
Your voice is a bit croaky.
Like you mentioned the class, like Brahmana was churning his thighs.
The what?
The Brahmanas were churning the thighs and arms, and Prithumara like came out of the body.
Oh, the churning.
So how to understand this?
Oh yes. I don't know if we can understand it, but actually Prabhupada in the fourth canto doesn't say it's not. He does talk about it. He does say, all the ingredients of the body are there, he says. And so the Brahmanas were so expert, they knew how to take the ingredients, and they decided to do it because they thought that the line of Anga was worth preserving. That was another point that Prabhupada made. They thought to continue the line, and so that line and that body and that whole that seminal line was worth preserving. So he said, if the ingredients are all there, they can produce. From taking from the ingredients of one body, you can produce another body, and then the soul, by the karma, by divine arrangement, can go into that body. So they knew it. They had their technique to do it. Just like these days they do some cloning and all this. They take, so they take the ingredients or whatever they do, and they do some sort of clone. They do it in a modern way. But so the Brahmanas had that power to do it in that way. It's a combination of mantra and some sort of churning process. Don't ask me about how they did it, but I mean, I can try it on you, but I don't know how far I'd get. I don't know what'd come out of your body if I did like. Jai, all glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai.